Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. John Page is the multi-talented founder of startup Umbrellabird, an AI-driven company that focuses on analyzing user interview information and providing smart insights and takeaways for product groups. So Umbrellabird is just on the verge of a big launch, and in this interview, we'll hear from John about his vision, his past history, and how he dared to dream big. So welcome, John.
Great. Thanks to be here with you guys.
Welcome to the podcast, John. Let's get right to it. For a year now, you've been working on your newest endeavor, Umbrellabird. What's the quick pitch for Umbrellabird?
Yeah, the quick pitch is that we help product teams get more out of their user interviews. User interviews are often things that are analyzed through many hours. You might spend an hour on an interview and then spend many more hours looking at that recording, looking at a transcript, doing a deep dive later on, needing to synthesize this stuff. And you end up leaving a lot on the table. And our goal is to make sure that all those insights are valuable, able to be leveraged by the company, and are not just kind of put into a bucket for cold storage later.
Got it. So how did you come to this idea? What was the genesis of Umbrellabird?
Yeah, the story could start maybe a decade ago. But back when I was working on my PhD, I was writing a lot of literature reviews. So if you're not familiar, like academic papers will have a section where they talk about previous things that people worked on. And it became clear to me that this was very repetitive. Every paper has a literature review, and a given paper might be cited thousands of times. And so you'll have thousands of papers that sort of regurgitate kind of the same type of information. This repetitive task led me to be there's got to be a better way. I want to get away from doing this. And so I spent quite a bit of time on the side working on how can I automate away pieces of academic research that just felt repetitive and redundant. I spent time working on this, and it eventually got to a point, maybe we could dive in later, where it felt like a dead end in terms of where it was going in the market. And it was more of a tool that I was building because it was fun scratching my own itch. Once I pivoted to looking at product managers, it was clear that this task of analyzing user interviews was a pain point in that, yes, product managers were getting empathy from these conversations with users. They were getting some core insights, but often when they're coming to making decisions, it's what's rattling in my head at the moment. What do I kind of remember from the last time I talked to somebody? And that's where a lot of the decisions were being made. So as I interviewed people to get better understanding of problems in this product management space, I also hit that same problem myself, where I was I'm having all these awesome recordings with people, and I'd love to be able to get a lot of meaningful insights out of this. And I hate that it's just whatever is rattling around in my head. I want it to be more. And I think some of that goes back to my academic kind of background of wanting to be kind of more based in something a little more firm, maybe quantitative, or at least more rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
So you started a decade ago, but maybe it took a long time to find your focus. What was frustrating when you first started your project?
Yeah, I think, early on, this was, it probably makes sense for me to kind of break this up into two chapters. One, that first chapter is kind of a long slog of me building something really kind of for myself, imagining that it was going to be useful for the whole world. And I think there was maybe a seed of a problem that would be valuable for maybe all academics. But at that time, I had not taken a close look at the market and what the market needed. So second chapter is when I kind of took a realistic cold look at the market, realized that the academic world, you're playing with big institutional players, needs a lot of institutional, funding to survive those really long sales cycles, or you're selling into researchers who would prefer not to pay anything. So in terms of having a viable market there, it's a tough market to be in. And it's easy to, if you're not the first and the biggest, you probably should be in a different market. So my second chapter was really when I switched to product management.
Right. So it sounds like your initial attempt failed, and I'm happy to point out you're in a great company there. I mean, PayPal started with a very different vision. So did Google. So did Microsoft. All of them started in one direction and then pivoted. So you did the same sort of change, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure if everybody's pivot is the same. I think at some point there's like a bit of desperation of like, wait, I actually do want to make money. So, we need to rethink, what we're doing right now is not headed in that path of a viable business. So yeah, I'm glad to be in company of PayPal and other large companies. Hopefully we'll see some of the same success.
So just to review, what do you think was your original target market? What's your market now?
So, and again, I think for a lot of these questions, I'm going to kind of start from that second chapter of, kind of post that academic world. And so in this new space, maybe I'll back up a little bit and talk about why product managers at all, kind of for us. And this started kind of in my time working in the software industry. I've been both kind of an IC software engineer and an engineering manager, and kind of a leader at different levels at different organizations. And product managers have always kind of stood out to me as these people that are in this very central role that's hugely important. It's not always appreciated at the level of importance I think that it has on an organization. It plays a central role that helps bridge gaps of communication between sales, marketing, engineering, support, other aspects of business leadership. And they act as this like translator and helping people understand both kind of where's the customer, where's the user at. And they're at the center of this really hard problem of helping the whole company stay aligned toward whatever their mission is, tied towards an understanding of their user and their customer. And that's why we wanted to really focus on it. And I myself really wanted to try to help product managers with the belief that if we can help product managers, we'll have that outsized leverage on being able to help the organization itself be more effective. Now, once we started talking to some product teams, it wasn't clear who we were going to talk to really have more of that leverage. Like, was it going to make more sense to serve product operations people? Was it going to make more sense to help low-level product managers, directors of product management, different tiers? There's a lot of optionality there. And so we did start by casting kind of a wide net there. And it was obvious pretty soon, maybe like 20 interviews in, that there was a lot more commonality on kind of that lower tier, like bench level, the ICs among the product managers who are really kind of on the ground, doing the work with their product teams and talking to users.
Right. So you're really focused on product managers as the target market today, right? And so you must have talked to a lot of product managers and done a lot of user interviews yourself.
That's correct. And some of this was born out of that past experience where, scratching my own itch. And as an engineer at heart or by trade, I definitely had the temptation to build and then ask questions later. And so for this journey, I decided, okay, I'm going to commit to doing 100 user interviews before I write a line of code. And so I did not exactly make my commitment, but I did get pretty close. So I think once I got to about 40 user interviews, it was clear that the initial kind of target of what we wanted to build wasn't the right thing. Pivoted towards a very different kind of thing that we're going to build. This is moving from like a document management search kind of focus over to more of this user interview analysis that we're talking about now. And then from then on, continuing to do interviews. We've done well over 100 by now. Probably started actually writing some code around the maybe 60 interview mark.
So tell us more what you learned from your interviews.
Sure. So one of the things that really stuck out to me was like the diversity of experience. So I would say a lot of the companies that I had experience in, previously had a specific pattern in how they were dealing with product management and communicating insights to different team members. And each interview presented a very different way of doing that same thing. So seeing that there's a really broad diversity in do people talk to customers at all? There do exist product managers that don't actually talk to users or customers. Fortunately, those are pretty rare from my experience. And then there's a huge diversity in how frequently. So I would say that about 50% of the product managers that we've spoken to are doing in between 10 to 20 user interviews per quarter. And then you have maybe like 20% who do more than that. And so this started to kind of give us that insight that, okay, there's like some frequency, some continual discovery that is coming up as books like Continuous Discovery from Teresa Torres and other kind of foundational works around talking to your users are becoming more and more important, more and more a part of how we expect to be building product. Other, interesting things that we've been able to learn is, we've been doing these user interviews both prior to and after the launch of ChatGPT. But being able to have some of these conversations about how are you using AI in your everyday work? What do you think about it? It's been really interesting to see that some product managers haven't touched it. Some product managers, are using it constantly for everything, and trying to understand why is somebody a user or not a user has been really helpful for us to understand what's going to bridge that gap for them to be comfortable using a tool that leverages AI, since that's core to what our solution is.
Right. So I'm curious. You spoke about different patterns of usage. What specific problems are you solving for product managers? Or I guess another way to spin it is, what will make people excited about this product?
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the org, a little bit of the culture and maturity of the product manager in terms of what they would get out of the system. So if you're in a really large organization, it could be that you have a dedicated UX research team. And so you as a product manager might just say like, I wonder if we should do this thing. Like, I need to know if there's this feature that we should be building. And then they just hand that off. And then the UX research team returns with some core insights, maybe some snippets or pull quotes of here's what we're hearing. All the way down to you might have a small organization where it's more scrappy and the product manager is having these direct conversations with users. And so one of the things that product managers can get out of our platform is they can kind of do both things, in the sense that we encourage product managers to be having these conversations, to be building that kind of human empathy. And we're helping them to scale the amount of conversations they can have by offloading the burden of the analysis and synthesis to the platform itself. So there's still room for product managers to express themselves in the way that they are analyzing and synthesizing information. But the bulk of that work is done by the platform.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this is an AI-powered product. What does that mean?
So what that means is that we are leveraging the latest and greatest, ChatGPT style stuff. So GPT-4 under the hood to, help anybody that's not super familiar with this stuff. Another keyword is the large language models. So we're using large language models. One of the benefits here is that these models, what they're doing is they're basically like translators. So you can think of them as translators, where they can take long form content and break it down into short form content very easily. they can also do extractive stuff where they can say, okay, here's a really long transcript. Show me all the pains or gains or desired outcomes that were found in this transcript. And so some of what we do, you could have a product manager that, copy paste all the transcript, into ChatGPT, and with enough back and forth of figuring out like what is the right prompt I need to be asking it, could get some very similar insights to what we're getting. So a lot of also what we're doing is taking some of that guesswork and some of that kind of new busy work out of their hands. It's really kind of our belief that ChatGPT was so exciting because it did present this new user experience of a way to be able to interact with this amazing ability under the hood. And there's going to be a ton of new user experiences that are leveraging this amazing ability under the hood. And so we're trying to continue to build that forefront of what are these user experiences. And for us, we're targeting product managers. What are those user experiences for product managers that can leverage these amazing abilities under the hood and not just create more busy work for people?
I see. So we have seen so many advances in AI technology. I'm curious about what you see in AI going in the future.
Great question. Yeah, so it is really hard to project. I definitely assume that these things will continue to get smarter, more consistent. So if you had played around with ChatGPT on the early release, and then you've played around with ChatGPT or GPT-4 now, you've seen like an increase in the apparent intelligence of what you're getting out, the ability of it to kind of reason over both long form content and give you really solid reasoning, walking through logical flows. I think what we're going to be seeing is everybody, including us, trying to find out what are the frontiers there of this translation ability. Take some information into a different form of information, build reasoning pipelines to automate new systems. And so I think on our side, we're just focused on what is that next thing that we can build. And I think that that's where people should be focused. Like, what is something that I think is complex, a hard part of my job? And is there a way to think about this as either a translation problem or a reasoning problem? And if so, then there's probably a way to leverage large language models to be able to automate some of this.
Right. Well, keep in mind, we're going to ask everybody we interview these questions, and then from their shared knowledge, we'll come up with the category busting AI product. Right, Cecilia?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Well, looking forward to it.
You've really dug into what's available in AI, but you came out of a data science background. So you've been playing with these concepts for a while. Yep. Could you tell us more about your background and how that kind of undergirds Umbrellabird?
Sure. Yeah. Some of my background begins with like the PhD work that I was doing, where it was very kind of quantitative focused, a lot of quantitative economic analysis. And since then, I've done a lot, both in teaching statistical analysis, data visualization, and doing that work within companies. Some related pieces are work that I've done at some past companies. One of those being an accessibility company, where we were building out machine learning tools to try to identify what are pieces of a website that are inaccessible, and can we accurately identify those? Because this can be a pretty difficult, time-consuming thing for people to manually do. Mm-hmm. And this ends up tying back into natural language processing and how do you take large pieces of text and reason about them in a way that is actionable. And so I think that is some of the common thread into what are we building with Umbrellabird. It is ultimately trying to take a large amount of qualitative data and try to reason about it.
So you did mention that you started this product when you were working on your PhD. What field did you study?
This is economic. So So a little bit unrelated from software engineering and a little bit out of left field, but in general, I think that what I learned there and was more of a way of thinking, a way of trying to think in terms of models.
Mm-hmm.
There's a famous quote from somebody that all models are wrong and some are useful, and that's something that's kind of stuck with me of, these having a framework for a way to think about a problem clarifies your own thinking, and it helps you to see more clearly. And at the same time, you also need to be aware of kind of the gaps there, that any model or framework that you put up is going to have weaknesses. And so you need to kind of keep those in mind. And I think that has been some of that foundation throughout this process of building first research filter and then Umbrellabird now.
Right. I read somewhere that economics is kind of like theology. They're both very high-level abstractions, and the real world is somewhat disconnected from those abstraction layers. Is that fair, or is that totally unfair to economics?
No, I think it's fair in some ways that are maybe more humorous, even that some people can be very dogmatic about their positions.
Yeah.
But I think that ultimately it's useful, maybe in a similar way that a parable or a proverb might be, and that it gives you kind of a way of thinking about things, and having a structured approach can be beneficial as long as you're aware of those weaknesses. So I think the problem with economics can be if you say, here's my model and it's right, it's always going to be right or something. That's the problem. But you can still use a model to help you see what information do I have, what maybe hypothesis should I have, what questions should I be asking. And until you write these things out and structure your thinking, you sometimes don't know what are the right questions to ask.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thanks for illuminating that. I've always wondered that about economics and what the value is. So thank you for explaining the value.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that everybody go run out and get a degree in economics, but
Yeah. So
do
talking
it if you
about
enjoy it.
economics, we have not yet asked one important question. What was the name of your product? How do you come up with the name Umbrellabird?
Yeah, great question. I took a journey of buying many books on product naming and deciding that I wanted to try to do a good job of naming this company. So I parked a month of just trying to figure out what would be an appropriate name. And by appropriate, the goals that I had were flexibility, so that we would have the ability to pivot. Because I believe very firmly that we would have an idea and a hypothesis of what we need to build, but I didn't want to do to myself what I did previously with Research Filter. Research Filter was a little bit too focused in terms of it's got a name that sort of tells you something about what you might think it does. And Umbrellabird doesn't tell you too much, with the hope that we can build something great that people can begin to identify with that name.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's naming is always a trick, right? I mean, you have names like I mentioned PayPal earlier, which is a name that somewhat captures what you're doing with the product, even though they started in a different direction. But a name like Google meant nothing at the time, meant absolutely nothing, right? And so the name that you came up with could go in a lot of directions, right? Hopefully you won't end up creating umbrellas or birds.
Yeah, that's right.
But you'll provide something that gives people shelter, gives people meaning, and hopefully it'll be the next big thing. So we wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
It's a lovely name. I like it. So if I have a final important question. You know that our podcast is about people who dare to dream. So what do you dare to dream, John? What future do you dare to imagine you are creating with Umbrellabird?
My dream, our dream at Umbrellabird, is to eliminate the mundane, to make it so that people can work on things that they're passionate about. As AI continues to take more and more of the things that we thought were only humans can do, we need to continue to find ways of doing meaningful work and keeping humans at the center of that work.
Yeah, I think it's so important to keep people in the loop, right? I mean, this is your user interview focus. Really helps to do that, to have people's voices come to the foreground. So, well, thanks for daring to dream with us today, John. Appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see big things from Umbrellabird.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, John.
Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on DARE, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on DARE, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. DARE is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.